Hello everybody and welcome back to Split Couch Games. Ben here with another mod load order list for Skyrim Special Edition on Xbox One. Now, today, and as you can plainly see on screen, we've got something that's a little bit different. And as the title of the video stated, this is going to be a vanilla plus load order. So let's get into it. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly do I mean when I say Vanilla Plus? And for those of you that don't know, real quick, Vanilla is a term used in the modding community to describe the base game. So if I reference the vanilla version of Skyrim, I mean the game without any mods. So, with that in mind, what do I mean when I say Vanilla Plus? Well, to put it plain and simple, this is a relatively short list of mods. It is just under 30 different files, which may sound like a lot on one hand, but realistically isn't a whole lot on the other. And this short list of mods is it's going to modify and improve upon the game in ways that help accentuate the base experience. It's going to change how the game looks slightly, and it's also going to add in some functionality and tweak some existing systems just enough to improve a regular playthrough. It's also going to add in, lots of more NPCs and that kind of thing, improve the sound of the game, all of that kind of stuff, again, to kind of make a basic playthrough of the game a little more enjoyable. It basically kind of brings the game up to a more modern standard on some levels, but not in all aspects. Now, this mod list does only use up 2 gigs of space in the 5 gigabyte allotment on the Xbox One, so you do have plenty of wiggle room. So, that in mind, one thing that I do want to touch on, and I'm sure you can see it in the video that is playing right now, there is a mod in here that drastically changes the way the game looks. This mod is by no means required, obviously, but this is one of the easier ways to completely overhaul the way the game looks and make it kind of look a little nicer and more crisp without using up a tremendous amount of mod space. A lot of the more realistic looking mods out there, like Skyrim Graphic Overhaul, Skyland, Static Mesh Improvement mod, all of those kinds of things, they use up a large amount of mod space. So if you want to make the game look a little better and give it maybe a little bit of a different art style, then you're going to want to use the mod that we will get to a little bit later down this list. Now, to start with list. Obviously, as always, we have the Unofficial Skyrim Special Edition patch. Again, this is a patch, essentially, that is unsupported by Bethesda, but it fixes a lot of the issues that may not have been fixed in the base game. Now, if you don't understand why this mod is needed, then it would be best to just simply read the description of this mod. That being said, this is required for a few of the mods that are in this load order, so if you want this load order exactly, you have to make sure that you have this mod. Next up on our list is the Realistic AI Detection mod. Now, it pretty much does exactly what it says. It improves the AI interaction and the detection system within the base game. If you've thought that maybe when you're sneaking around and you're standing right in front of someone that they should see you regardless of your sneak level and that kind of thing, this is going to help make that a little more understandable and everything. So, one of the things that it points out is that enemies will search for you longer, about 30 seconds if they see you instead of 10 seconds. And about 60 seconds if you fire an arrow into their knee, instead of the 15 seconds. Now, it does plenty of other things. As you can see, the features list is quite in-depth, but it is something that I recommend if you are looking for an improved base experience. Now, next up on the list is the Joy of Perspective. Now, in case the image there isn't clear enough, this mod basically makes it so that when you look down in first person, you will see the rest of your body. Now, although that does sound pretty wonderful on paper, this is a mod after all, and it can really only use a bunch of in-game assets without completely bloating the file size. So it does a really great job at mimicking a more modern first-person feel, you know, where, again, you look down, you see the rest of your body, that kind of thing. But because of the way this mod works, and because of the way animations and that kind of thing in this game work, it does have its issues. For example, if you are unarmed and you do a power attack, then you will see your arms kind of stretching and bending in kind of weird ways if you're looking down while you do it. In addition to that, the sneaking aspect does also look a bit strange. Now, the next item on the list here is just an additional file for the joy of perspective. And this file is one that gives you optional movement behaviors. And essentially that just makes it so that, you know, things like one-handed weapons, you know, bows, crossbows, swords, axes, all that kind of stuff, are gonna have additional movement directions added to the animation and everything. Otherwise, they would be held kind of in funky positions and everything when you look down. So I do recommend downloading this. It is only 1.43 megs, so it's not going to be anything that you have to worry about taking up enough space that you won't have room for any other mods you want to add to this list. Next up, as always pretty much, is Realistic Water 2. As I've said before, it drastically improves the water visuals in this game. It kind of goes out of the way to make it look a little bit more like water and less like slimy, goopy stuff that you don't really want to touch. After that, we have the Lush Overhaul. And I've covered this plenty of times. It does pretty much exactly what you might think it would do, and that is it adds tons of extra flora to the world of Skyrim. It's going to increase the amount of grass and the amount of trees that you see during your adventures. Highly recommended. It just kind of makes the game feel a little more full and inhabited by not wildlife, but specifically plants. Following Lush Overhaul, we have something that's a little bit different. Normally I would use Vivid Weathers, but I decided to take True Storm's Special Edition for a run. And there are a couple different reasons for that. One, variety is the spice of life after all. And two, True Storms is a much lighter weather mod. It still improves the weather in a lot of different ways, but it doesn't improve it nearly as much as what Vivid Weather does. And I chose True Storms simply because it is a little closer to the vanilla experience, and in addition to that, it doesn't adjust the lighting of the game nearly as much as what Vivid Weathers does. Now, again, that is primarily important because I'm trying to get as close to that vanilla experience as possible. Now, if for whatever reason you want to use Vivid Weathers instead, and I would personally recommend it because I do, again, prefer Vivid Weathers, that's totally fine. It will give you different results than what you see in the video, and you may need to download some additional patches for some of the other mods later on. In addition to that, I do have one mod a couple down from here that you may want to not include if you are using Vivid Weathers. And I'll get more to that when I get to that mod. Now, next up, we have essentially the big guns of this mod list. And that is ASO Oil Version Artistic Skyrim Overhaul. Now, this mod is like I said, it's the big guns of this mod list, and it does one major thing. It completely overhauls the entire texture palette and art asset collection of the vanilla version of Skyrim. What it does is it basically makes everything look like an oil painting. Now, personally, I really, really like the way this looks. It kind of keeps that video game feel to it, because everything isn't super realistic looking, but it's also not like super old school looking or anything. A lot of the colors and a lot of the textures and everything still have a lot of depth to them and a lot of complexity, but it's also, again, at the same time, not too complex. It's this very interesting look, in my opinion. Now, that being said, there are a few issues with this particular mod. Primarily, the draw distance or the level of detail on more distant objects or more distant environments does have a tendency to be lacking. There have been a few times where there have been entire sections of the game that were just missing way off in the distance, and they didn't actually spawn in and start rendering until I got closer. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that they were like really flat and it was obvious that it was far away. That happens too, but I mean they were literally missing. When I first approached Bleak Falls Barrow from the mountain area where Helgen is, Bleak Falls Barrow wasn't actually there. Neither was half of the mountain. I could see straight through it out into the skybox, and that was a little weird. Granted, I haven't had that type of issue reproduce anywhere else since then. Even going back to that area, I didn't get this issue to reproduce, so it could have just been a one-time thing because the game was still loading up, all that kind of stuff. It's a little difficult for me to tell. But those types of like small graphical issues are fairly present with this type of mod. And there are other versions of the ASO overhaul. If you are interested in this type of look, but you don't necessarily like the kind of swirly art style that is present in everything, then you may want to maybe consider looking into one of the other overhauls that this mod author offers. And again, this is not anything that's necessarily required. This is just the, texture overhaul that I decided to go with. One major benefit that this texture overhaul does provide is that because everything is of a much lower resolution, the game does seem to run a little bit better. I had absolutely no, frame hitching or anything like that during my time with it. And that's honestly an improvement. Pretty much every load order that I've had in the past have had a few frame dips here and there, but this one hasn't had any. One last thing that I do want to say about ASO Oil Version Artistic Skyrim Overhaul, that's a mouthful, is that it does have a little bit of an issue when it comes to pairing with the next two mods on the list, which are custom lighting mods. It works well for the most part, but one thing that this particular retexture mod does do is it gives everything kind of like a glossy sheen to it, and that can become problematic in darker areas when you use a torch. I was going through Bleak Falls Barrow, and when I pulled out a torch, all of the spider webs became essentially mirrors. They just turned into like these giant white glistening blocks of blinding light. It was a little unsettling and a little unfortunate, because otherwise I was really enjoying the mod. So if you do this, it may be worth considering removing one, if not both, of the next two mods. But I really, really do like both of the next two mods. Now, let's move on. Oh boy. Okay, so this mod. first of all, have no idea how to pronounce it. I'm going to try to pronounce it, and it's going to be wrong. I think it's Claralux, because it's Claralux. Yeah, I don't know. But what it does is it does an overhaul of the exterior lighting in the world. That's pretty much it. Now, earlier when I mentioned that there was a mod that doesn't probably work the best with Vivid Weathers, that's this mod. And that's because Vivid Weathers does alter a lot of the exterior lighting as it is, and this will conflict with Vivid Weathers. So if you're gonna have both, then you're gonna want to have whichever one you want to win out at the bottom. But honestly, if you have Vivid Weathers, there's no point in having this mod. Because like I said, Vivid Weathers alters it, and I honestly think Vivid Weathers does a better job. That being said, this does appear to be a little bit more customizable than Vivid Weathers. There's an entire area just north of Riverwood where you can go in and you can customize a lot of the different settings. You won't get nearly as dark as what Vivid Weathers does, but you can customize a lot. You can change saturation levels, darkness levels, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really nice. Now that, paired with ELE Interior Lighting Overhaul, allows you to create a very well-lit environment. ELE Interior Lighting Overhaul is a mod that I've covered before, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with it. But basically, it just makes the interior sections of the game much nicer to look at in terms of lighting. Now again, with the ASO oil version overhaul that we were talking about earlier, it can create some complications. Sometimes the dark areas become way too dark, and then when you pull out a torch, all the surfaces are kind of shiny, so it makes it still hard to see, but just for the opposite reason, because now there's too much light. Moving on, we have kind of a long list of mods that I have talked about before, so we're going to blow through these. We have Ordinator Perks of Skyrim. As I've said before, wonderful mod. Download it. It basically overhauls all of the perk trees in the game, and it is well worth the 20.9 megabytes of mod space. Ars Metallica is similar in function to Ordinator, but instead of overhauling the perk tree, what this does is it overhauls the smithing and crafting systems in the game. And basically, it'll just make it so that, you know, when you make certain items, that it is a more understandable collection of materials. You know, instead of like, oh, you need 3 iron ingots and 1 leather strap for, you know, this thing over here. It'll be like, well, you need like 1 iron ingot, you know, a leather strap and some wood or something like that. It also changes some of the base formulas as well as adding in new ones. And it even allows archers to forge their own arrows. Now, moving on from that, we have populated cities, towns, and villages. Again, covered this before. It basically just adds in collections of random NPCs, you know, different hunters, merchants, all that kind of stuff. You'll see them walking down the roads. You'll see them in cities, walking about, talking with people, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really add a whole lot to the game outside of making it feel more lived in. There are going to be more people that you'll come across, and it makes the game a little less empty. Now, the Immersive Citizens AI Overhaul is a mod that, again, I've talked about before, but it basically just drastically improves the artificial intelligence of friendly NPCs in order to make them to act more like actual people. You know, they'll move around their environment and that kind of thing with a little bit more of a natural manner. They will, you know, go home. If it's raining, they will sit down and eat and sleep and all that kind of stuff, which is their functions that were performed before, but they do it in a much more understandable and almost scheduled fashion than what they did before. Now, Immersive Wenches is a mod that kind of does the same thing as Populated Cities, Towns, and Villages, except it just adds dedicated barmaids and that kind of thing to the game. It adds bards that travel along the roads, and again, bar maidens to the bars and inns and everything, and it just makes the inns feel a little bit more like an inn in the type of fantasy setting that you would expect to see. And this right here is just a patch for Immersive Citizens and Immersive Wenches so that they work together in a nice manner. Now, Relationship Dialog Overhaul. Again, this is a mod that I've covered before, and it's kind of a nice mod. It adds over 5,000 lines of completely voiced dialogue for NPCs for more than 50 different voice types, focusing mainly on friends, followers, spouses, and rivals, but this dialogue does branch out and affect some of the more generalized NPCs that you may come across. Again, kind of in reality, it just makes the people of Skyrim feel a little bit more like people and less like robots. Skyrim player revoiced, again, just kind of a, vocal overhaul for the player character. I recommend it. There is one for each gender and race available in the game, and you only need one. So this is something that you would need to decide what race and gender you're going to play before you start playing, but that's easy enough for most people. Now, the next 3 or 4 mods are all pretty much in the same wheelhouse, and that is Immersive Sounds, which adds in a whole bunch of kind of customized sounds, makes some things a little more realistic and completely alters others. For example, this allows you to customize the volume of footsteps and that kind of thing, and it also changes the sound of, metal clashing to sound a little more appropriate and that type of thing. It basically just completely overhauls the sound system. Sounds of Skyrim Civilizations, basically, again, covered it before, it adds in 223 new sound effects for the cities, villages, farms, and remote locations where civilization is present. It basically makes it so that, if you're in a market, you kind of hear people talking, walking around, that kind of thing. It adds cats meowing in the alleys, all that kind of stuff. It adds in a lot of different sounds, and it actually completely kind of changes the way you feel when walking through different cities and everything. Now, that same kind of thing goes for the next mod, which is Sounds of Skyrim, The Wilds, and it basically does the same thing. It adds a lot of different wildlife noises into the game that weren't present before. Like, you can be walking around at nighttime and maybe you'll hear the flittering of some bats or something like that. That wasn't there before. Increased insect noises, all that kind of stuff. And this is just a small patch that adds compatibility between Sounds of Skyrim Civilization and Immersive Citizens. So if you have Immersive Citizens and you have Sounds of Skyrim Civilization, make sure you download the patch. Now, this next mod is Skybird's Airborne Perching Birds. And this may seem like a kind of a silly thing to add in, but it's one of the mods that I am actually kind of a huge fan of because it adds in something that you don't really think about needing in a game until you've seen it in action. And then it becomes just woefully present in your mind that there aren't very many flocking birds or anything like that in Skyrim. You don't really see birds much at all. You hear them all the time, but you don't see them. At least not that often. This adds in a whole bunch of birds will flock, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you will come across a robin or a blue jay hopping across the path as you're running by or something like that. Again, it's a small thing, but I feel like it's worth it. And now, again, we have a whole bunch of mods that I've covered plenty of times before. Reverb and Ambience Overhaul basically adjusts the rate, the rate and volume and all that kind of stuff that reverb and that type of thing happens in the game. It's really kind of nice. It helps make the caves and the castles feel a little bit more like caves and castles. Girly animation is something that just makes the run, sprint, and idle, slow walk, all those different kind of animations for female characters actually a little bit more realistic. It kind of puts a distinct line in between the male and female characters, whereas previously those animations were shared between the two. Belt Fastened Quivers does exactly that, puts the quiver along your belt essentially instead of on your back. It's more realistic, looks better in my opinion, and functions pretty wonderfully, especially because there are custom animations that are put in so that you draw the arrow from your belt now instead. Lore-based loading screens is kind of a little frivolous thing that I threw in there that just kind of makes the loading screens a little more lore-friendly. Surprise, surprise. Now, alternate start, live another life is something, again, covered plenty of times before, and it is something that I can't really play the game without unless it conflicts with another mod. And it does pretty much exactly what it says in the title. It gives you alternative starting options for playing through Skyrim. If you've played through the game before, and this is a load order that suits you, you want that vanilla experience, but maybe you want it to start off a little bit different, this would be a great mod for you. It allows you to have starting options such as, camping in the woods or being an outlaw out in the wilds. Maybe even a warlock's apprentice or someone who's locked up in one of the city holds. It will randomize certain aspects of your start and let you just kind of go. That way, you don't have to sit through that long cart ride into Helgen. But if you do want to sit through that long cart ride into Helgen, that's an option as well. And Cheat Room is Cheat Room. I really only have that in my load order because I do, videos like this, and I need to make sure that my character can level up quickly and all that kind of stuff. So that's not really needed, but you can put it in there if you want to. And that's all that I have for this particular video. Again, this was a load order primarily geared towards giving you a close to a vanilla experience, but with improvements so that the game is a little more modern and up-to-date in terms of its mechanics and that type of thing. Now, as always, if you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop a comment below. Maybe even follow me on Twitter and tweet at me. I do kind of pay attention to that, so it isn't something that would go ignored if you do decide to do it. If you enjoyed the video, share it with your friends. If there are any particular mods that you want me to cover that I haven't covered already, then feel free to, again, drop a comment below. I will take any mod recommendations into consideration, and if I have the time, I will cover it. And that is all for now. I will see you guys next time on Split Couch Games.